Good evening, everyone. My name is Konstantina Rentzou, and I am an assistant professor at the Department of Early Years Learning and Care, University of Ioannina. Today, we will be discussing about parenting leave policies in Greece and inequalities. In Greece, we have three main types of parenting leave. The first one is maternity leave. In Greece, maternity leave is relatively standardized at 17 weeks, with a mandatory division between and after childbirth. Importantly, the leave is treated as actual working time, meaning women do not lose employment rights or benefits during this period. Legal provisions have also evolved to include women who become mothers through surrogacy, reflecting gradual adaptation to diverse family forms. However, while this framework provides basic protection, it is still shorter than in some other European countries and raises questions about adequacy and gender equality, which we will explore later. Paternity leave in Greece has been significantly strengthened in recent years, particularly after 2021, which brought national legislation in line with European Union standards. Fathers are now entitled to 14 working days of fully paid leave, which represents an important step forward compared to previous provisions. This leave is flexible in terms of timing. It can be taken partly before the birth and partly after, or entirely after the child is born, but must generally be used within the first month. A key feature of this policy is that it is granted without any eligibility conditions, meaning that all working fathers can access it regardless of marital or family status. This reflects a shift towards recognizing fathers as independent caregivers rather than secondary supporters. The policy is also inclusive in scope as it applies not only to biological fathers, but also in cases of adoption and fostering up to the age of 8. This broadens the understanding of fatherhood and caregiving. There are also provisions for flexibility in more complex situations. For example, if a newborn is hospitalized shortly after birth, the leave can be postponed by agreement with the employer, ensuring that it can still serve its purpose, namely supporting care and strengthening the father-child bond. Parental leave in Greece represents a key policy tool aimed at enabling both parents to participate in childcare, and it is here that we can most clearly assess whether policies promote gender equality. Under current legislation, each parent is entitled to 4 months of parental leave, which is an individual and non-transferable right. This is important as non-transferability is intended to encourage both parents, especially fathers, to take leave. However, in practice, the design of the policy introduces some limitations. While the total leave period is 4 months, it is largely unpaid, with only the first 2 months subsidized through a benefit equivalent to the minimum wage provided by DIPA. According to the International Labour Organization, low or unpaid parental leave is a major factor discouraging uptake, particularly among fathers and higher earners. Eligibility is also conditional on 1 year of employment with the same employer, which can exclude more precarious workers, such as those on temporary or unstable contracts. This raises important questions about inequalities between different categories of workers. On a more positive note, parental leave in Greece includes strong protections. The period counts as insurance time, contributing to pension rights and healthcare coverage, and is also treated as actual working time for the purposes of seniority, annual leave, and severance pay. This reduces the long-term career penalties typically associated with taking leave. The policy also offers a degree of flexibility. Leave can be taken in installments or even converted into reduced working hours, depending on agreement with the employer. This can help parents better balance work and care responsibilities. Importantly, the framework is relatively inclusive. It applies to adoptive parents, and additional provisions exist for single parents, cases of divorce, or multiple births. Beyond the main leave types, Greece has developed a wide range of more specific entitlements. While these expand support for families, they are often fragmented, unevenly paid, and not equally accessible, issues that are central when we assess social inequalities. Turning to how parental leave policies in Greece support or not inequalities, in terms of access, we would say that access to parenting leave in Greece is not universal. It is strongly tied to employment status. In principle, many categories of parents are covered, including adoptive and increasingly some self-employed workers. However, in practice, eligibility is often conditional on having a stable employment relationship. For example, parental leave requires at least 1 year of employment with the same employer. This immediately excludes or limits access for workers in precarious jobs, temporary contracts, or unstable employment trajectories. In addition, access to maternity benefits depends on prior insurance contributions, which can disadvantage younger workers or those with interrupted careers. Perhaps most importantly, even when workers are formally eligible, the unpaid nature of parental leave creates a de facto exclusion for low-income groups. Many simply cannot afford to take the leave. As highlighted by the International Labour Organization, this combination of formal eligibility and economic constraints is a key mechanism through which leave policies can reproduce social inequalities. Here, in terms of take-up of parental leave policies in Greece, we see that there is a very clear gender imbalance in the actual use of leave policies. Despite the availability of multiple leave schemes, a significant proportion of parents, around 40%, do not use any family-related leave at all. Among those who do, most rely on a combination of different leave types rather than using a single entitlement. The most striking finding, however, concerns gender differences. Almost half of women report taking career breaks for childcare, compared to only about 4% of men. This highlights a deeply unequal distribution of caring responsibilities. Fathers' uptake of parental leave in Greece is particularly low, close to negligible levels in some datasets. According to comparative European evidence, this is strongly linked to the design of leave policies, especially when leave is unpaid or poorly compensated. So, even when policies are formally gender neutral, their actual use remains highly unequal. Despite important policy developments, gender inequalities in care remain particularly pronounced in Greece. Women contribute to bear the overwhelming share of unpaid care work. Time use data show a daily gender gap of over 2 hours, placing Greece among the most unequal countries in Europe in this respect. Part of this imbalance is linked to the design of leave policies themselves. While maternity leave is relatively long, paternity leave remains limited to just 14 days. At the same time, parental leave, although equally available to both parents, is largely unpaid. According to the International Labour Organization, maternity leave alone is not sufficient to reduce gender inequalities. It must be combined with adequately paid parental leave, meaningful paternity leave, and accessible care services. In Greece, the short duration of paternity leave limits fathers' early involvement, while the unpaid nature of parental leave discourages their participation altogether. As a result, these policies, although formally gender neutral, tend to reinforce traditional roles, with mothers remaining the primary caregivers. This is reflected in broader labor market outcomes, where Greece continues to exhibit one of the largest gender employment gaps in Europe. Beyond gender, parenting leave policies in Greece also reproduce important socioeconomic inequalities. Access to leave is not universal. It is closely tied to labor market position. Many rights, especially parental leave, require a minimum period of employment with the same employer. This excludes workers in precarious or unstable jobs who are often among the most vulnerable. Even when workers are formally eligible, financial constraints play a major role. Because parental leave is mostly unpaid, many parents, especially those with lower incomes, simply cannot afford to use it. This creates a clear divide. Those in stable, better paid employment are more able to take advantage of leave policies, while others are effectively excluded. As highlighted by the International Labour Organization, the level of compensation is a critical factor in determining whether leave policies are actually used. When leave is unpaid or poorly paid, inequalities in access and uptake tend to widen. As a result, parental leave policies risk reinforcing not only gender inequalities, but also broader patterns of labor market inequality. Looking at the broader picture, several important gaps emerge in both policy design and research. From a policy perspective, key weaknesses include the short duration of paternity leave, the low level of compensation for parental leave, and the limited availability of formal childcare services. As a result, families continue to rely heavily on informal care, particularly from extended family networks. There are also important implementation challenges. Even where rights exist, their uptake, especially by fathers, remains low. This reflects not only financial constraints, but also workplace cultures and social norms that continue to position care as primarily a maternal responsibility. From a research perspective, there is still limited evidence on how these policies are actually used in practice, particularly following recent reforms. More longitudinal and qualitative research is needed to better understand behavioral patterns and barriers. Emerging research, including recent empirical work on Greek parents, highlights issues such as unequal caregiving involvement, co-parenting misalignment, and workplace constraints as key factors shaping fathers' participation. Overall, this leads us to a central question. To what extent do parenting leave policies in Greece genuinely promote equality, and to what extent do they reproduce existing social inequalities? Thank you.